So I was talking earlier about compassion meditation, and this was from going to meetings in Atlanta in the middle of October at Emory University. And that was part of the first few days I was there. The last 2 days was a conference called the International Conference on Tibetan Buddhism. And this was an idea that came about, I think, from His Holiness, for sure, and others, thinking about how it's now been 50 years since Tibetan Buddhism has left Tibet and has been in many different countries. And I think they felt that it was moving towards the more intermediate stage where we needed to kind of think about the future based on what's happened over the last 50 years. Because there's been time to see what the trends are, what's happening, what's working, what maybe isn't working. And so they invited and brought over people from different countries, many tukus, high lamas, teachers, many practitioners were there. And they organized this into panels. And on each panel there would be 4 people and a moderator, 2 of the people speaking a little longer, and then 2 of the people not speaking quite as long, and then all the 4 of them discussing with the moderator, facilitating the discussion. And then sometimes there was time for questions from the audience, not always, but not much time, but mostly it was the panel, and very getting down to brass tacks kind of discussions, but in a very harmonious way, I thought. And so they talked about different topics. And one was Tibetan Buddhism's encounter with science, with modern science. And His Holiness has the mission in his mind and is supporting this by bringing science into the monasteries. And they're working on translations of, they're having science books written and then translated Tibetan and English. And this is being introduced now, and that's what's being worked on at Emory. So he has the vision of there being 21st century monastics, is what he says. Be a 21st century monastic is what he's telling the monastics who are in Tibet and India and Nepal. The next area was about Tibetan Buddhism and social engagement. And that was a session that I went to, which talked a lot about activities that people are doing now to try to keep the Buddha Dharma flourishing in many different ways, as well as an update about what's happening in many countries. As one person had been traveling for the last 14 months and had visited many Buddhist countries. Then there was a section on translating the Dharma, which I also went to, and that was very lively, with Jeffrey Hopkins and Thupten Jinpa being the main speakers, and they're both very learned and scholarly and interesting. So what they had to say was very interesting. Then there was a section on Tibetan Buddhism in the Modern Academy, and I think that was really, I think maybe trying to look at what universities offer versus what monasteries offer. I didn't go to that section, but I think that there will be further information about this available on the web. And then there was one called Surviving Modernity in Traditionally Tibetan Buddhist Regions, and this is one I went to, although one of the participants in the panel decided that they would change the title to Embracing Modernity, because it is going to happen. But that was very enlightening, learning about the situations in many places in some detail. What I really took from that is it's very complex. So many levels of causes and conditions coming together for all of these situations, and a lot of problems and a lot of great things happening, all mixed together. And then there was one called Tibetan Buddhism in Modern Western Culture. And I think that one was more, well, what it said it was about was to help maintain the integrity and the identity of Tibetan Buddhism as it reaches cultures where people have different needs and maybe expectations and dispositions. Although I didn't go to that one, I went to the other ones. Because you could only go to half. They were running concurrently. So, but anyway, it was a very interesting time. I felt like all of the panels I went to the discussions were really, they didn't just stay surface, they were really had substance to them. And each one of the panels then had like what they called a business meeting, where they came together and participants were allowed to come, and I went to one of these on surviving modernity, where they were going to come up with 3, maybe 4 points of recommendations or things to work on, or ideas for the future. And so and those were presented at the end of the conference, and they had very specific ideas from each one, which in the ones I were at, that I attended, seemed to be quite useful and pragmatic, as well as overreaching in terms of having a vision for the future. I think that was what I thought was quite important, is having a vision and then having ways to support that. And I think that one thing that I felt was good about the way this was organized is it brought together kind of some of the tools that we have in working together, maybe from our corporate and nonprofit models of how to get things done when you have a lot of different things going on, like having a vision and breaking things down into a different level of detail. I felt like there was a little bit of recognition of the need for that, and that seemed to be useful. So I think that there's more information can be found on, if you look up on the search engine, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Emory 2010. You will easily find this page, and it's about his 2010 visit to Emory. He's a professor there, so he visits on a regular basis. Last time was in 2007, and I suspect he'll be there in the future within the next 5 years. So they have ongoing projects, and a lot of this information is easy to find.